time to start working on the center and side back slats. Over here I have a pile of MDF. It's all 3/4 inch. I've taken the template for my back slat curve and I've attached that to this piece. All this MDF is 23 inches long and 3 1/4 inches tall, with a 3/4 of an inch thick. There are 9 pieces to each stack, which gives us just a little bit more than what we need as far as the width for the glue ups for the center back slat as well as the side back slats. So I have 2 here I'm going to make. You can just make one if you want. One 2x4 sheet of MDF 3/4 inch will get you enough to make one of these. 2 would be enough to get you to make 2 of these bending forms. So what I did was, just like before, I made my template, cut it out, sprayed it with some mounting spray, and attached it to my piece with the curve just barely below the top here. And we'll go to the bandsaw, cut this, and clean it up. But what I also did was I took a ruler and I extended out the lines on both sides here. So that gives me a little bit extra on each side. To match a little bit extra, I'm going to cut for my pieces. I don't need to cut my pieces to the exact length of my back slat. I actually want to cut them a little bit longer, and then we'll work down to that final dimension. Just like our previous templates, I have this one clamped to the bench. I penciled it out. I grabbed my longer block plane, and I'm just going to clean this up, going in the down direction, flipping it around, going in the down direction on the other side. After cleaning up our first piece, I took some double stick tape and attached this other piece of MDF to it. With this other piece attached, we'll come here to the bandsaw and remove the waste on the right side of the line. I drew a nice line, my permanent marker here, but just stay away from this side. And then we'll head over to the router table, and at the router table, we'll pattern route using a top bearing bit or a bottom bearing bit. Actually, it doesn't matter here. But we'll pattern route the shape so we get ourselves 2 pieces to build our bending forms out of. I have my 2 original templates on the bench right now and a new piece of MDF for each. So what we're going to end up doing is taking our drill, and after we align the MDF to each other, we're going to take the drill, we're going to drill some holes, just 3 holes, counterbore them at the same time, and then screw the pieces together. After we screw them together, we'll head over to the bandsaw and cut away the waste, then come back to the router table and pattern route the waste away. And we'll continue to do that until we've done 9 pieces for each of our bent lamination forms. Alright, we finished our bending forms. I have 2 of them. If you only wanted to build one, that's fine. You just would do one glue up one day and the next glue up the next day. They're both identical to each other as far as the curve is concerned. The bottom and top have been marked out for each. And all you have to do now in order to finish these is just grab some packing tape and tape over the MDF. The reason you do that is so that when you're gluing your laminations up, the glue doesn't stick to the MDF. Okay, I have the 2 templates for the bending forms, both the center back slat and the side back slats here. If you'll take a look at the width between these 2 points, you'll see that it's a little bit wider than 6 inches, where somewhere around 6 and 1/8. So most likely you won't be able to use a 6-inch jointer to do this, even if you took the cutter guard off and had the room to joint over and then plane down. It's just probably not possible on a 6-inch jointer. However, I will show you how you can do this using a planer instead. If you have an 8-inch jointer, this is not going to be a problem at all. Well, someone forgot to turn the camera on. Sorry, I didn't get any footage of me planing the board down. However, I did get footage of me squaring up one of the edges. What we want to do now is rip 4/8 of an inch thick pieces from our 2 blanks here. The first thing I did was I marked each of the blanks with a distinctly different mark so I know which laminations are coming from which piece. Now the saw is set up so that the blade is just over by maybe 1/16 of an inch or so from 1/8 of an inch. I want to remove more material than the 1/8 of an inch I need to remove here. The next thing I did was I set the correct blade height for my bandsaw. And I also made sure that my blade was square to the table. And with everything there set, and I know that I've had this set up really well for a while, I'm pretty confident I can take a pretty straight cut. When you use the bandsaw to resaw, something is this tall, at least for me, I try to do a couple of things. Number one, I try not to overwork the saw. So I don't sit there and try to force feed the piece through, because all that's going to do is cause the saw blade to track in so many different directions that you don't want. And then number two, on the same lines, I let the blade do all the work. I'm not in a rush here, so if it takes a few minutes for me to pass this board through, I'm okay with that. So I'm just going to sit here and let the blade do the work and just very slowly push the blade, the piece through the blade. I mean very slowly, I'm talking about very slowly. The blade here is going to be doing a ton of work. It has a ton of materials to remove, and the less stress it has, the better, and the cleaner the cut you're going to get. If you thickness planed 2 sides, go ahead and flip the board over and cut the other side out and pull out your back lamination or the front, whichever it may be. I'm not going to do that. I'm just going to go over to the jointer and rejoint this face. I'll joint the corner again real quick and get 2 square sides, and I'll run these both through again until I get my 4 pieces from each. I finished resawing my 2 different laminations. I have 4 pieces for one, and when I put them down in order, and then afterwards I marked them with numbers 1 to 4 for both of these. So these are done. I'll set them aside. And then let's talk about this thing to my right here. So this is the auxiliary bed I'm going to use on my jointer planer machine to thickness my plies. Normally I would just head over to my drum sander and use a drum sander to bring these down to size. But for you guys out there, you may not have a drum sander, and if you don't have a drum sander, then hopefully you have a planer. And if you have a planer, we can do this here too. So let me talk to you about how I built this. The first thing I did was I took a ruler and I measured the width of my bed. Now my bed's 12 inches wide, so I cut this just a little bit short of that. After that, I measured the length of my bed. And then I cross-cut this piece so it fits the length of my bed, plus 3/4 of an inch for the stop right here. I then ripped the stop 1 inch wide and cross-cut that to match my bed. Now for me, I had some screws and whatnot on the far right-hand side, so my piece is not the full width here. It's a little bit shorter. Yours may be different than mine. After that, I came over to the table saw here, and I took my stop with my bed, and I clamped the stop to the bed. I took a drill with a bit and a countersink on it, and I drilled 3 holes and I screwed in 3 screws to hold the stop to the bed. After that was done, I grabbed some paste wax and I put a nice coat of paste wax on top of this. And that will really help our pieces slide through as we plane them. So why are we doing this? Well, we built this auxiliary bed because our jointer planers, at least my combo machine, and most of the planers that I've seen can't get really below 1/4 of an inch. And these need to be 1/8 of an inch thick, or actually just a little bit proud of 1/8 of an inch. That's where this comes in. What we're doing here is raising the bed 3/4 of an inch. So now we can plane down to our 1/8 of an inch. I have the auxiliary bed installed, the bed raised up, and the parts for my laminations here. At the chair, I measured with my dial caliper the width of the mortises for both the crest rail and the rear apron. For me, those were 0.499 inches. My bit's been sharpened a couple of times, so that's probably why it's a little bit less than 1/2 an inch. And then if you take that 0.499, or let's just round up to 0.50 inches, and you divide that by 4, because we're using 4 pieces for each lamination, that's 0.125 inches for each lamination thickness. I want to shoot for a little bit more, 0.257, 258, and that'll give me enough material that I can sand down to the correct thickness. Assembly table, and it's time to do some glue ups. I have some pieces of wood that are helping me lift up my bending form, and I have my pieces of my bending form here and some clamping cauls. The bending form right now is set up so the top is furthest away from me, and I also marked my pieces so that I know which side or which end is going to be the top. I cut some clamping cauls out of this MDF with this melamine surface on top, and these are the same width as the pieces here and the same length. So for me that was 22 inches long, and I think it was somewhere around 6 3/4 of an inch wide. I have a whole bunch of clamps. For this glue up here, you're going to need a lot of clamps. You need to apply pressure throughout the entire length of this piece. So I have somewhere about 28 clamps on this bench right now, on the table that is, and I'll probably end up using close to every single one. I have a nice fresh bottle of Tidal Bond. You're going to use a lot of glue in both of these glue ups, so you can make sure you've got enough glue. I also have this little roller here to help me spread the glue out real quick. Cup of water and some rags to use for a squeeze out. And I also have some quick clamps here, and the quick clamps I'm going to use when I take the clamping cauls after I've put glue on all of these and I put everything down. I'm going to use the quick grip clamps to come in and get everything snug as far as their width so that we don't have too much moving around. So what happens is, these clamps, as we all know, when you clamp down and you're twisting, as they twist, things want to move. So I want to do my best to alleviate as much of that as possible, and I'm going to, at least in the center here, while I start my glue up, clamp together the pieces as well as the clamping cauls. You also want to make sure which side is going to be facing out. As you look down on the bending form, whatever's up is the front of the chair, and whatever's behind is the back of the chair. Once you're sure you've got everything here, it's time to start. So here we go. I'm just spreading a nice, generous amount of glue. I'm not worried about lots of squeeze out. In fact, I want lots of squeeze out. What we need here is a really good bonding connection between all these parts. And to ensure that, we need lots of glue. you need to work fast because there's not a lot amount of open time with this glue. I'm using the glue because it's going to be strong enough for this connection. Yeah, you could probably use something else, maybe some plastic resin glue would be good. It has a really long open time. I like to use that when I'm doing some other laminations that are much larger, both in length, potentially in width, but more so in length. I grab my clamping cauls, and the next thing I need to do now is bring everything together for its length. I'm going to go in a little bit when I do this, not necessarily start on the edge. And I'm not going to clamp it down all the way to start with, just a little bit, enough to get it bending. And I'll get a couple of clamps on, and once I have a couple of clamps on, then I'll start tightening everything down as I move down. I'm just going to go through one last time, make sure everything's nice and tight. We have both of our laminations glued up to our bending forms, and I think we've done pretty good today. Lots of glue. That's all I got to say. It's lots of glue, lots of clamps, somewhere around 22 or 24 clamps on each glue up. And then I used half a bottle, almost half a bottle of glue. It's been 24 hours and we have 2 back slats all glued up, looking really good. I have my templates over here for both the center and the side back slats, as well as the pin. We'll bring the 2 pieces together and match up the curves and make a mark, and using that mark we'll transfer that across and use that as our baseline for the bottom of our templates. From there we'll draw our templates onto the pieces, our side slats onto the lamination for the side slats, and then for our center back slat, what we'll do is we'll draw the template for the outside of the back slats, and then from there we will start drawing in the inside of the back slat as well. We won't be able to reach all the way up, and don't worry, I have a solution for that. Now that I've drawn the outside shape of my center back slat, I'm going to show you how I deal with the inside shape of my center back slat. So the first thing I do is using the reference points for the bottom of my template, and you'll see I moved everything down 1/2 inch here for the center back slat. What I'm doing now is I'm taking my ruler and I'm lining it up with the line from the bottom of the template that we just drew onto our piece. I'm going to just lightly bend my ruler, let go on the end here, and find where 13.5 inches is. I'm going to make a little tick mark. And then I'm going to do the same thing on the other side, and then make another mark at 13.5 inches. So with 2 marks at 13.5 inches, I can now connect those marks and make a straight line, and within reason be relatively parallel with the bottom lines I have down here. Now that we're looking at my 2 marks, I'll take a ruler, connect the 2 of them, and draw myself a line. With that line drawn, I now know where the top of my centerpiece is going to be. Next thing I need to do is find out what the center is between the distance between the edge here and the edge here. In order to do that, I'm just going to take my ruler, line it up, and for me that is 3 inches and 13/16. Okay, so half of that is 1 and 14, maybe 14/16. So I'm going to come in with my ruler lined up and mark in 1 and 14/16. Plus this is maybe a 32nd of an inch more. And now I have my center point press. And now what we're going to do is with that center point marked, and I have a piece from our clamping cauls spring clamped to the board, and we're going to take our drill press, center it onto that point, and once we have it centered on that point, we're going to drill through that point and create a 1/8 of an inch relief right there. With that 1/8 of an inch hole now drilled, and thanks to our clamping caul it was tear out free, we're going to take that same clamping caul and line it up to the edge of that hole and the edge of our pattern down here, and we can draw a straight line. And we'll do that on both sides. Now we have the center of our back slat marked out for where we want to cut it on the bandsaw. I just wanted to show you that I also brought down the location of my side slats to the same baseline as my center slat. I want the curves to be the same throughout the entire length of each piece. We're over here at the bandsaw, and now what we need to do is cut out our center back slat and our 2 side slats. Make sure to stay on the waist side of the line, and just gonna try as best as possible to do nice smooth cuts without the blade wandering too much. It'll just be less for you to have to clean up later over at the bench. Before we head over to the bench and we actually start working on our center back slat and our side back slats, we need to figure out some things first. Number one, we need to figure out where we're going to do the work. Now, I know we have to fair this curve both on the outside here, the inside, as well as the 2 outside curves for the side slats. But beyond that, what we need to do is a couple other things. Number one, we need to figure out where this piece is going to fit into our mortises, and then from there, where we're going to move material. Okay, I've lined up my center back slat with my mortises right now, and what you can tell is I'm using this edge here to line up with my inner mortise here, and I can see that over here I have material to remove. Here I have material to remove, as well as here. And the mortise walls are vertical, so I want to start shaping these pieces so that the material enters in vertically. Over here at the bench, I have the center back slat into my vise, and basically what I want to do is start working these edges. I know that I need to fair this, but I want to get the fit and then mark where I can't go any further and then start fairing the curve. That's at least how I'm going to work this one. So if this was our good edge, which is the inside as you face the right piece, then I'm going to leave that alone. I'm just going to take a file here, a raspa that is, and I want to start to just remove some wood and have it be vertical. I did a little sanding and a little work of my rasp, and I got this piece just in right now. What I'm going to do is take my dead blow hammer and knock the piece down a little bit. And when it becomes a little bit too hard to hit anymore, and you can tell that there's a lot of force against it, take the piece out. So right here you can see where I'm a little shiny on the bottom, and on the sides here you can see where it's shiny here, on the insides here where it's pushing the wood up on both sides. Now you know where you have to remove some material in order to get a deeper fit. Okay, the center back slat is now fit. We're really good. We're just about a ½ inch deep, and I'm not going to try to push any further. I'm at the point where if I try to push any further, I'm worried about splitting the wood back here, and that's the last thing I want to do. So we're at the bench. I have my center back slat clamped into the vise, and I have my spoke shave, and I'm just going to start working these curves. That's not the best way to hold the piece, so I'm going to keep my body against it. I cleaned up one edge, I went over and did a test fit, and I was still too big, and that's good. So I'm going to come over to the other edge and start cleaning that edge up as well. With the center back slat and the side back slats fit in to the rear apron, what I want to do now is something I didn't do on my center back slat, and that's to smooth it out a little bit. So what I'm going to do with my pencil here is make a little light line just around the edges of the center back slat. With everything fitted to the bottom and cleaned up, now what I want to do is I want to find out where I need to cut for the length of these pieces. In order to do that, what I've done to help myself out is I have my crest rail and I've clamped it up using the slip tenons, and they are connecting to the rear legs. I have these quick clamps holding everything together. In order to find out exactly where I need to clamp the crest rail to the leg, I made a tick mark on the back of the crest rail where the bottom of the mortise was on the crest rail, and I lined that up with the bottom of the mortise in the leg. Now with that here, I can come with a pencil and line up where my slats would enter into the crest rail and then make a pencil mark for myself. Now this gives me a rough location for where the slat is going to enter into the crest rail, and I want to do that for all three. Alright, we marked our back slats at the chair, and the mark we made in pencil was roughly where we thought they would enter into the crest rail. I then went and marked a ½ inch up from that, and I'm going to now cut these pieces on the bandsaw at a ½ inch from that penciled mark. Now that we've cut these to length, what I want to do is get them to fit individually into the different mortises on the crest rail. The first one we're going to deal with is the center back slat. Now the center back slat is a little too thick right now. I took my dial calipers and I did a measurement on them, and I'm about 0.525, 524 or so on the sides. So what I've done is I grabbed a sanding block with some 150 grit sanding paper on it, and I'm going to bring down the thickness of this crest rail until I get to the thickness of the mortise, and that mortise thickness is 0.498. Yeah, about 0.498 everywhere. You can see on the shiny areas where I'm just a little bit too thick as far as thickness of the back slat is concerned. It's on both the front and the back. So I got a little bit more sanding to do. Sorry. Right now I can take the top of the rear back slat, center back slat, and put that into the mortise across its entire width. So I'm just a little bit too thick. So what I'm going to end up doing is removing material from both sides. And what I want to try to do is remove material from both sides evenly. I have the center back slat in my vise, and I took the opportunity to mark out pencil marks across a little bit more than half the length of this piece. And I want to use those to help me start to fare this curve. So I got my spoke shave out. So I'm going to make sure I take equal strokes from both sides. So that was, I believe, 2 or 3 so far. Okay, let's work from the other side. Okay, after taking an equal amount of strokes from both sides, I'm going to take the crest rail and see how if it can fit. It may be a little difficult to see, but basically I'm just a little too thick across the entire length of this mortise. So I have just a little bit of material left to take out. I'm just going to take a few more passes from each side, like 2 or 3, flip it around, do the other, and keep testing my fit until I get in to the mortise. Alright, I got the center back slat fitting into the crest rail, but not for much depth yet. We're just barely in, it's tight. And as soon as I take the piece out, I can see that I'm no more than 1/8 of an inch in. And at the same time, not only am I 1/8 of an inch in, but you can see right here, I have some shiny parts to my piece too. So the wood is being constricted or squished up in this area as the crest rail is going on top. So we need to do a couple things. One, we need to remove more material from each side, equal amounts again, and then we need to sand this back a little bit, just so on each side, so that we can relieve some material so we get a nice fit. Okay, we're in. Crest rail fits nice. The center back slat fits nicely as well. I've smoothed out half of the length. So what I'm going to do right now is I'm going to mark out where the center back slat exits the mortises on the bottom. Just very lightly, very light pencil, so much that I can just use barely touch it with some sandpaper and erase it. And that way I'll know where I can continue to work to fare out this curve on both sides of the outside of the center back slat. With this in, the next thing to do is to fit our 2 side slats. These side slats are just a little bit different than the center back slat. Mainly the difference is how they enter into the crest rail. So here I have the slat roughly at the direction we want it to go up and then eventually enter the crest rail. We have it curving or sweeping over to the right, and the other piece would be to the left. What we want to try to do is remove material and start making a vertical, so angling this tenon so it goes up into the piece instead of entering. It can't enter straight up. It has to enter at a curve here as the piece curves. But what we can do is the piece curves, we can remove material from this outside edge and start creating a angled tenon instead. So the first thing we're going to do here is just fair up our cut on the bandsaw. Fair up this curve on both sides. So we've already got a fit down here in the bottom. So what I want to do is, just like before, just like so many other times, we'll take the pencil, we'll make some pencil marks, and it's kind of got this curvature to it right here, at least on this part of it, on this curve. So I'm going to try to work downhill and then turn around and work downhill on the other side. So just like the center back slat, the side slats are just a little bit too thick. Not as thick as before, but it's still a little too thick. This is a 0.508, 0.509. So we got to sand a little bit of material off on each side to get it just below ½ an inch. And let's see how we fit. Oh yeah, real good. Now this fits for the thickness into the mortise on the crest rail. What I want to do is head on over to the sanding station and slowly sand a nice vertical line right here. All right, I got my 3 back slats fit into the crest rail, and we're looking good. I have the slip tenons out of the crest rail right now, so the back is flexing a little bit right now. But I am making sure everything fits because I still have those lines that come around from the bottom of the crest rail all the way down to the back of the leg. So I'm just making sure that the bottom of the crest rail touches those lines. And I think we're really good here. Try to ignore this line right here. It keeps screwing me up. But otherwise, everything's really good. We got a good fit. The curves are faired. They feel really good. I'm very happy. Later on in the video, we'll carve the crest rail and add the ebony bars with the inlay, but that's for a little bit later. Next, what we want to do is focus on the arms, and then after that, eventually move to the panels. But I think we're looking really good right now. This is great.